Lesson 9. Perhaps one of the biggest changes which has occurred since I came to Japan nearly 20 years ago is that many Japanese people now take it for granted that most foreigners living in Japan can communicate in Japanese. As nobody thought the average foreigner could speak Japanese, nobody spoke to foreigners in Japanese. They either used English or avoided speaking to them at all. This in turn made it very difficult for foreigners who were studying Japanese to find people to practice with. As a result, it often took a long time for their Japanese to improve. This traditional Japanese attitude to foreigners has by no means disappeared completely, even today. This attitude was especially puzzling to me because it was the precise opposite of the traditional attitude in England. When I was growing up in England, the country suffered a labor shortage, and this led to a wave of immigration from former colonies. People from India, Pakistan, Hong Kong, the West Indies, and other places came to live and work in Britain. Nobody ever doubted for a moment that they, or the Europeans, such as Italians and Spaniards, who came to work in hotels and restaurants, could speak English. As was often said about the traditional Englishman, if a foreigner did not understand what an Englishman said, then he would simply repeat it more loudly. This arrogant attitude that foreigners should know English was undoubtedly a reflection of Britain's experience of having had both a great empire and enormous wealth and power in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But although the attitude was arrogant, it had the good effect that any foreigner who lived in Britain did very quickly learn to speak English. Nowadays, both Britain and Japan have changed greatly in their attitude towards their own language. Sometimes I have even asked the way somewhere by Japanese people in Japanese, something unthinkable when I first came. Of course, the traditional idea that Japanese is a very difficult language does have some basis in fact. This intrinsic difficulty of Japanese has, it seems to me, both good and bad sides. It certainly makes it difficult for foreigners, unless they stay in Japan a long time, to conquer the language. At the same time, the difficulty of the language acts to some degree as a barrier protecting Japanese culture from being overwhelmed by foreign, especially American culture. It is the language which allows for the thriving of a distinctly Japanese popular culture, as well as the survival of Japanese literature. In this sense, as an Englishman, I feel a little envious of the Japanese and their language. In the last 20 years, the English language has become firmly established as the world language. The effects of the British Empire, post-war American power, the end of the Cold War, and the rise of the Internet have all made it difficult to imagine any other language replacing English in this role. Nowadays, it seems that wherever you go in the world, you can always find someone who can speak English. At the same time, however, British English has increasingly lost its status as the correct form of English. Moreover, the fact that British people speak English, while it opens up the world for them, also exposes Britain very directly to the influence of a popular international culture which is largely American in origin. Personally, I do not object to American popular culture as such, but I feel sorry to see any country lose its distinctive attitudes and identity. Many people in Europe feel the same way, and they worry about the effects of American cultural imperialism. Actually, many British authors, actors, artists, and others have benefited greatly from Britain's membership of the English-speaking countries and access to the vast market which this represents. But they have done so at a price, for Britain is far more exposed than countries which do not speak English to the danger of losing its own cultural identity.